Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Plus you're closer to the coffee over there.
Yeah, ahead. Yep, that'll work. Good morning, everybody. I want to call to order the meeting, a special meeting of the Ad Hoc Solar Committee. Start with roll call. Dave Bauer's here. Michael Peen. We can get Mike going.
Yeah, I'm here. Switch problems on the computer.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Dave.
Chris Norberg.
Here.
John Nicholson.
Here.
Tom Kitson.
Present.
Forrester.
Here.
And Charlie Boonstra and Dee Duffy are here to help us. Next order of business is approval of the previous meeting minutes. And I want to thank Alice for detailed minutes and any additions or corrections. Hearing none, we'll leave them approved as submitted. And then I just want to recognize any visitors here with us and give any an opportunity to talk before we get started with the meat of the meeting. And I'm sorry, I don't know. Dane? Okay, glad to have you with us. Do you have anything that you'd like to comment on at this time? Okay, and Jamie, yep. Okay, and then Keith. Now, what I like to do.
We have two up on the board.
Yep, oh, I'm sorry. For our Zoom visitors, I have an Al.
Hello, Adam Luz.
Oh, okay, yep.
Yep.
Anything for us right now, Adam?
I don't know, I guess maybe just to start off with an observation. As we're going through this today, I hope that we can address that notice of these projects to non-participating landowners be notified by certified mail of the project specifically. It seems as, that was what was thought to be customary, but ultimately was not required previously. So it leaves potential for residents to not have been notified of the project. And so anyways, just hope that we can address that as well before we adjourn with this whole project. So that's all I've got.
Thank you, Adam. Good
Thanks.
comment. And Amber?
Hi, good morning. Amber Miller, National Grid Renewables. I don't have anything at this time.
What I'd like to do is kind of what we have done in the past and make this more of an informal meeting. I would ask that we work in the spirit of cooperation. I know at times this is a emotional situation and, we're trying to come to an ordinance that strikes a good balance for everyone. And that's our goal. And I would just ask everybody to be respectful of one another and their points of view, and we'll get through this. The two areas of interest and areas of changes since our last meeting were, we did put in a definition section. We may actually expand that a little bit, and setbacks and the screening sections are the ones that we'll be concentrating on today. I think in terms of a big picture, the idea I think has been to increase the setbacks and screening for the residents that are non-participating adjoining residents, and then say the setbacks for the areas not around the residents would be more minimized so that we're not wasting farmland. So that's kind of a big picture, but I think you'll see from the markups here that we've been kind of increased and I'd say the setbacks and the setbacks of the fences. So we'll just talk through that. I think this is the first edits that we have, right? Dee? In terms of, this is the first at the very beginning. These are the first statements that are changed. Yes. Yep. So number one was there, but without the number one. So that was the solar energy system. We did include a definition for a resident exclusion zone. And this was kind of described and discussed last time, but it's a 1,200 foot by 1,200 foot square area centered on the non-participating primary residence. And unless otherwise agreed to by non-participating adjacent landowners, SES equipment and fencing are excluded from this area. So this is a change, and this is a change to address feeling closed in. It gives the non-participating non-participating resident a minimum of 600 feet from the residence in all directions in a square to have clear of both solar panels and the fence. And that may or may not create at times, I would say, an area that is owned by the development that needs to be maintained outside the fence, but that is what we're calling an exclusion zone. I'm gonna just scroll on down. We added fences, design standards. So the design standards and bulk regulations listed in the Ag 1 district for fences, setbacks, lot size, lot coverage, et cetera, et cetera. So the word fences was added. Just a number correction there on D. Fencing, I think that whole section was added. We thought it would be helpful. So security fencing having a minimum height of 6 feet shall be installed, maintained, and secured around the solar panels and all energy producing storage equipment of the SES and required to comply with the National Electrical Code requirements for fencing. At the option of the non-participating resident, an 8 foot high woven wire fence can be substituted at the boundary of the exclusion zone of any home located on an adjacent non-participating parcel. Except at the boundary of the exclusion zone, all fencing shall be placed at the property line of all parcels participating in the project. Fencing shall contain appropriate warning signs at the posted such that it is clearly visible from outside of the SES. The required fence shall be maintained to prevent the growth of woody vegetation or noxious weeds within and along the fence. And that's also covered in another section. Fencing is not required between participating parcels. So setbacks, I guess I'm going to roll unless somebody has a comment. I'm going to roll here. Oh, yeah, after shall be maintained, you could certainly add by the developer or by the are we talking landowner or SES owner? We get the idea, yeah. Just, you could say applicant. Sure, yep. Yeah, we're going to unmute everybody that's following us on Zoom as well. And if you have comments, please do. But we're going to roll through this unless there are comments.
Mr. Bowers, if I may talk for a second.
Sure.
I believe in that section, it's hard for me to see on Zoom, but you referenced that the fence for all other adjacent landowner properties, which would just be like the back 80, you described there that the fence would be on the property line. Is that what you described?
That is correct.
And is there any consideration, as was talked about before, there was a 15-foot setback around those perimeters? And so is there not discussion about having the fence be indeed set back 15 feet to allow for maintenance of both sides of the fence? Would be one recognition. And the second, if it's a chain link fence with barbed wire, the barbed wire typically is angled outward, which would put that over the non-participating landowner's property and, typically not be allowed, even in that sense. So is there any other thoughts on that?
What I would say, I think in terms of a fence and fence regulation, the fence, including the top of the fence, would have to be on the property line. It can't extend over property they don't own. So I think it would, at a minimum, have to be set back, whatever that overhang is.
Mr. Bowers, this
Yes.
is Courtney Kennedy speaking. That is true. Usually what happens to prevent, the top part of the fence encroaching on another's land, that fence would be set back whatever inches or feet required to make sure it didn't lean over on adjacent property.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yep.
In regards to Adam, I know you would like to see a 15-foot setback or a setback in that area. We felt that in terms of at least at this point, I think the general consensus is in terms of good farm ground usage and that type of thing, that on the property line, obviously not encroached over the property line, but on the property line seems appropriate. And we've put most of the concessions, I guess I would say, around the residence, because that's where you live every day. So, any further comments here? So I added the word in setbacks equipment. So the setbacks we discussed last time are unchanged.
Mr. Bauer, I'm sorry to interrupt the flow. I was having trouble getting back off of mute there again.
No problem.
So, before we even move on from that, I respect then where that, where you were trying to put, the security net for the residents. And, I'm also thinking of good use of farmland as well, because the perimeter of the entire SES adds up to be a large amount of acreage that the non-participating landowner would not be able to use for farming operations anymore. So even if it were to not be 15 feet, which is an extremely small amount of setback for the fence along those property lines, then it should be 5 or 6 feet to allow for them to maintain both sides of the fence and for the non-participating landowner to not sacrifice tillable acres on their property because they have to stay back from this structure. So again, is there any consideration of getting it back 5 feet or 6 feet even? So that, because again, the layout of the SES will grow to be outside of that fence for farming operations. It impedes the farming operations of the non-participating landowner. And if you add up, they're going to stay back 6 to 10 feet from that fence. They're not going to be able to plant crops into, and they lose then income level on their side of it as well. So, I'd really strongly feel that we should consider, a minimal setback at least to that fence. So.
Thank you for sharing your point of view, Adam. Are there anybody else that would like to speak to this area?
5, 6 feet, to maintain anything. You can't get them over.
Mike.
Sorry about that. Talking it, don't mess with it. Oh, we're good. Yeah.
Step away from the microphone.
Stay away from the mic. Bruce, slap him if he touches.
Yeah. Well, I just didn't feel the 5 or 6 feet is large enough to do any kind of maintenance, so can't get any kind of, they're gonna use a tractor, a mid-sized tractor of some sort, and to maintain around the fence, and so 5, 6 feet's not gonna fit.
From what our discussion was earlier, there will be at least a minimal setback based on the angle at the top of the fence to make sure that the fence does not encroach on the non-participating farm ground. Yeah, Chris.
To Adam's point and kind of to John's point, that if we're requiring the fence to be maintained by the company, they're going to need to be able to get around it. So more than likely, they're going to have to leave a setback anyways to be able to maintain it on the outside of the property. If like they're not going to have a tree that falls down on the fence, but to be able to mow noxious weeds, so on and so forth. I don't know, what's the company's aspect or opinion on that? Like,
Is it anybody from the developers have any comments on this?
Well, look,
This is Courtney Kennedy speaking. Amber Miller, I would defer to you, but I think essentially what Mr. Norberg has said is true. There would be a little bit of a setback so the company could get around it, but I would defer to what Amber has.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, typically we do have a bit of a setback, as minimal as possible, and it's going to depend on it's going to depend on the topography of the site in different locations, and how, what exactly is on the adjacent parcel, exactly how far that setback. So I couldn't say exactly what it would be. It's as minimal as possible for our operations team. And they determine that once we get to that point. We do work with adjacent landowners to try and minimize the impact for farming operations, as far as turnarounds and those kinds of things for their equipment. We have done that in the past, and Keith can probably speak to that, being a farmer. So we do try to be a good neighbor, but yes, we would minimize the setbacks just for what we need for our operations.
so I think once again, this developer that we're on the phone with, they recognize the need. It's the next one that doesn't. So they're here participating with us and say, hey, if we ask for 5 feet, 6 feet, is that unrealistic, or is it 2 feet? Like, at least it pushes it off the non-participating residents property line to allow, in like Adam's case, to be able to turn around and not have to hug a fence or worry about hooking it, because you guys are going to do that anyways.
Right. And I don't know. And Keith, I don't know if you have a better feel for how close to the property line we get, but for operations, we're just putting up fence on another project right now. But yeah, it's as close to the property line as we can get. And so I would say, 2 or 3 feet would be probably right in that ballpark.
So what would be some reasonable language in here for that?
I don't, 2 or 3 feet there, so we can walk along the other side of our fence. Yeah, tie something on. The old days, one guy owned one end of the fence, the other guy owned the other end of the fence back in the day. This is not that big. A couple feet off, and it's not an unusual thing. You could walk on the other side. Adam could still as close as he wants. Yeah. That could work. That's a pretty easy fix, and we could do what we're doing.
Sure. So if we were to say a minimum of 3 feet, we would be,
I think unless our attorney disagrees with that, but I'm fine with that as a farmer and as a developer. Being helpful to the farmer.
What do you normally maintain it with? Just,
Well, I'm just thinking, walk along with that or something. We're not trespassing.
Yeah.
His property. And then, we would, gonna have to mow on the other side, 2 or 3 feet. Gonna have to mow on that. On the outside of that side.
Yeah, for as far as the noxious weeds go, they're going to backpack spray something in there with probably 2,4-D or dicamba. They're just going to let native grasses grow up. They may mow it once a year in the spring or the fall, but once again, if they have to, that's them who have to haul a push mower out there, not anybody else.
But 3
that right, 40 feet and for Adam?
I think it sounds what Adam wants.
Yeah.
Courtney, unless you have something else, or Amber, I'm good with.
I think from a developer point of view, we would be amenable to 3 feet.
I couldn't really hear anyone that was speaking in the background there, so I didn't pick up a lot of what was said. And I understand everyone's desire to keep this as minimal as possible. I think the practicality of a UTV, being able to drive the outside perimeter of the fence by and stay on their own property, essentially by the company, like an 8-foot wide path allows for a UTV to go along there to maintain those primary noxious weeds and yet stay on their property to do that. So
I understand where you're coming from, Adam, but to say that they have to do it with a UTV to control the noxious weeds, that if they want to go in there and walk the whole fence with a backpack sprayer, that's their prerogative. They may put up one project and realize, man, we're going to put the 8 foot back just because we're tired of labor upon labor. And realistically, it's going to be far enough back, but I think we need to put a minimum in there is what we're trying to do. Because like you said, when you get next to non-participating landowners who you're going to work with them, if they ask for 6 foot back, you're like, what's another 3 foot? We just have to have the minimum in there for everybody.
County standpoint. not so much.
In case you guys want to talk.
What's that, John?
Looking at it from a county standpoint, what needs to go in the ordinance.
right. I think, and I appreciate the conversation. I think a minimum of 3 feet kind of strikes a good balance, and then that does allow them it allows them to maintain it. It would have to be on foot pretty much, or yeah, if they need to do anything from the outside. Yeah.
Dave, I have a question in regards to that, if I could.
Sure. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm trying to picture this as far as being the boundary of a fence line there. They're a minimum of 3 or whatever it ends up being, 15 feet. Where is any buffer going to be set back from that fence line? Are they going to put the buffer on the inside of the fence or the outside of the fence?
No,
If they
I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
put it on the outside, now you're going to take more property.
This discussion is not around the residence where a buffer is required. This is strictly outside of the residential screening buffer. I think we throw around screening and buffer, and we've kind of come to the conclusion they're one and the same thing. So, and you could make a case that they're not, but I think the way we handle it in here, they are. Screening and buffering are only around that exclusion zone around the residence. And this minimum of 3 foot setback has to do with everything else.
I don't have any objection to the term, use of the term screening or buffer or whatever. It's just whatever somebody chooses to refer their comment to, but I'm not totally comfortable with some of this, just to let you know.
Okay. Okay. Anything else in this fencing section?
Not participating in the project. Because parcels participating in the project, there wouldn't be a fence. It'd be non-participating parcels.
Well, the fence is on the participants'
Oh, okay.
ground. I think that to me is a little confusing, but the idea is it's going to be on the applicant's part, on the applicant's property, obviously not on the non-participant.
We understand what we're saying, and Courtney did a nice explanation of it. But for future projects, do we need to describe in there that overhang of the fence, that barbed wire part? So
Well, I think the 3 feet addresses that. If you have a minimum of 3 feet, then that becomes a non-issue, because it won't be 3 feet. It'll be more like a foot
Mhm.
or 16
Okay,
inches.
I thought we were doing 3 feet plus that, so. that's
No.
fine. I'm good with that.
We're just interested in that barb hanging over the non-participant. And 3 feet would definitely take care of it, even if we had 3 strands there, it isn't gonna go over 3.
Well, and as a farmer, I can get right up. If you give me 2 foot, that's like, I understand where Adam's coming from, but reality is 2 foot, I can get pretty close. It's scary. You're gonna shift down.
You don't wanna
You're gonna
hook
get
that
across
fence
it.
either, so you're gonna stay back.
Well, the combine head fits into that overhang. It's fine.
We know how good the farmers are around here.
Oh boy.
Okay. Setbacks, I think this is pretty much the way we left them. 15 feet from any property line. And this would be referring to equipment. So a minimum 15 feet from any property line, a minimum of 600 feet from any foundation, and that's a 1,200 foot square centered on the primary dwelling. And then the road setbacks there are in III. 600 feet from a platted subdivision. All this is I think the same as previous. Okay, and this all came out. This was the previous wording. Screening. So, and at this, I think, and Alex kind of came up with the format for this, but where it says the visual screening offer shall provide the following options, and I like this way of doing it. So let's just read through those. So the adjacent non-participating homeowner at their discretion may elect to have a security fence set back 600 feet from any foundation of the dwelling in the proximity of the solar array instead of in proximity to the property line. And that's really what that exclusion zone describes. So if they want it on the property line, that's fine. But this allows them to say, yes, I would like to take advantage of that exclusion zone. I'd like to have 600 feet back. Second one, the adjacent non-participating owner at their discretion may elect to receive a one-time payment from the applicant equal to the cost of design, installation, maintenance, in perpetuity, and removal of the visual screen in lieu of the actual screen. This option shall be detailed in writing by the applicant, including a breakdown of the one-time payment components. This one-time payment allows for the adjacent non-participating homeowner to install their own visual screen on their own property if and as they desire. And that's pretty much what we discussed last time. That allows them the option of planting what they like for their own personal, and then owning it at the conclusion, or owning it all the time, actually. So it improves their property, and they are compensated one time for that. Number 3, If they want the developer to install it, they can. So the adjacent non-participating owner at their discretion may request a visual screen be installed and maintained by the applicant. And if this option is chosen, the visual screen will be installed on the SES side of, we probably want to say on the immediate, or I would say in the close proximity, but essentially it'll be on the SES side of the property line. This provides the most effective screening and minimizes the potential of damage to draining to tile damages. So if they elect to request the applicant to put the screen in, they're going to put it on their property. There won't be a fence. The fence will be behind it.
100 feet away.
Generally.
Yep.
So it does what I think it's a good, I think it's a good way to do it, because the screening is more effective if it's closer. The further back you get it, the less effective it is. And that will allow for not damaging drain tile and that type of thing. And it keeps it. So, and then lastly, some homeowners or some non-participants may choose not to communicate. And if they do, the default would be that the screen would not be put in and that there would be a monetary compensation like number 3. So we leave the homeowner or the non-participant is looked after, even if they choose not to put in writing their request. I want to make sure that we're protecting someone that may not be as engaged in the process as they should be. We want to protect them, and this allows them for a one-time payment, and then they are able to put in their own screening. There's no sense in the developer putting in screening that they may or may not like, and this provides them compensation for that. And I thought that was a pretty reasonable way of handling that. Comments?
I have a quick question, Mr. Bowers, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Looking up at that provision where it says the visual screening offer shall provide the following options. Is that adjacent or non-participating homeowner? Are they to choose one of the following options? Do we need to clarify that more? I just want to make sure I understand it all the way.
Yeah, I think it is a little confusing because the first one we've already kind of said in our definitions. It wouldn't, if you choose one, we want to allow, that should be the default, really. There may be some that would want the fence right at their property line, but I think to answer your question directly, no, it's not just choosing one. You would choose 2. You would choose one. If you want one, you would choose it or not, and then 2, 3, and 4 would be the other thing that you would choose.
So could 1 and 4 almost be combined together to be the default? Because that's kind of what you're looking at, right? That they're going to get a one-time payment and it's going to be 600 feet away. Or you can choose to work with the developers and have it 600 feet away with buffer screening on my side of the fence or buffer screening on their side of the fence. Or they can elect to have the fence right on the property line. I don't know.
I think you could actually do away with 1 because that is really, we're saying that's the default in the definitions above. But I think, Chris, what you said too, you could combine 1 and 4 to say that would be the default.
Would it be okay, Mr. Bowers, if I talk to this a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Adam.
So first thought is, I think as I think about some properties, I think it makes sense for visual screening, let's say for a good portion of the property, but that non-participant may have a portion of their property where they're like, it really doesn't make sense to put the visual screening towards the backside of my property as an example. So now they're coming up with a little bit of a hybrid program, right? Does that fit in this, what you're talking about? If that non-participant said, yep, visual screening here works, and then back here, it's not really needed. So are you able to do a hybrid program under these parameters?
I think it would allow for that. I think it's difficult in an ordinance to describe every possible situation, and we encourage the developer and the non-participant to negotiate something that works for both parties.
Right.
I think this verbiage allows that. It requires kind of, I would say, quite a bit from the developer and encourages them to negotiate in good faith to reduce that. Like if screening behind an outbuilding is not really all that useful, that would be something that they could negotiate. I don't think we have to cover all those options in the ordinance necessarily. By requiring it, I think it leaves the door open for those type of negotiations to happen. Charlie.
Yep. And when
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Just a quick question about, it's good that we have these options available for landowners to be able to do this. I guess my concern with this is, as you look at it, is there a time frame to which this has to be done? Because the company can come in and try to do all of this, and if they don't have a response from one of the adjacent landowners or something else as to what they want, down the road when they already have it built up, they may say, well, I want it this way, and then that kind of screws over the company when they're trying to.
Sure. That's kind of followed in the verbiage that follows this
Okay.
area, and we can read through that.
Okay.
I did have another couple of points that I wanted to bring up to you all.
Okay,
On
go
this
ahead.
topic, you referenced the default would be that no visual screening was going to be put in. If there's a participant that just is, in their own shell and they're not wanting to interact with anything, right? The default is then that there's some sort of a monetary payment that's made to the non-participant. I just have caution. I feel like that I would rather see just the default be that the visual screening is put in. I feel like if there's if the default is to pay monetary payment, I feel like that could be disputable. I mean, as far as we don't know the situation of the non-participants' ownership of that, if there is a death or something, if there is, it just seems like it would be it would create a little bit of a squabble or something, I guess, or a dilemma. And if they're not communicating at all, I don't know how you figure out who to make that check out to. And at least that's my view. I would rather just see the default be that the screening just gets put in if there's nothing, so that there's no monetary requirement of the company. So that's just a thought, I guess, on that piece of it. And I had one more, but it slipped my mind. So I'll let you all take it from there.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
Any comments from the developers on that, or anybody on Adam's last comment?
Talking to a mic.
I would agree with Adam, because what if you have a tenant residing at the property and the owner chooses not to take the money, then the tenant is the one that's going to be suffering with the view shed. So
But the person who owns, call it a rental property, is going to be reached out to by the company, and it doesn't matter the tenant either. So if I'm renting out a property and I just want the money, the tenant really doesn't have a say in that, right?
And it's come and go. Landowners.
Yeah, I guess I guess I would like to hear from the developers on that. I don't think they're going to have a strong opinion here because it's of equal cost to them.
I think this forces the non-participating residents to actually engage in the conversation, which at the end of the day is ultimately what we want them to do.
Absolutely.
We don't want them to just sit back and be angry at the world. We want them to engage in the conversation to get what they want.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is what we're looking for. And I apologize. Courtney got kicked out.
Uh-oh.
I know, she's trying to get back in. So she texted me and she's like, I got kicked out. I'm trying to call back in. So I apologize for that. She didn't just leave. But we're trying to get a point of clarification. So she heard the answer on how this is going to work, but she did ask me to clarify. She's like, can you clarify? So they're choosing, there's Courtney right now. Okay, so she got back in just in time. So can you clarify how this is gonna work, that they can choose one of the four, or they choose two of the four. That's what we're trying to determine. Two of the visual screenings, they're choosing two of those four options, or they're just choosing one of those four options. That's what I'm trying to determine.
I think where it may make sense is to combine number 1 and 4 as a default, and 2 and 3 would be the choices. So you could choose one of either 2 or 3. And if you don't choose that, then it's going to be set back 600 feet. And the fence would be sent back 600 feet. And we have to decide on whether we default to the monetary compensation
Okay.
or to the actual visual screen.
Okay, yeah, well, and I think that that's where it makes more sense to have have that negotiated. I don't know if it would be a default or not, unless the county wants to make that determination for, and I don't know if they want to make that determination for people necessarily, but we don't necessarily have I mean, we would prefer that, do the monetary payment, and then we don't have the have to deal with the landscaping typically. But that would be our preference, but I think homeowners are going to be split 50-50.
Yeah, I think, and as Chris said, what we're trying to do is protect those that may not be engaged
Right.
in the process.
Right.
Well, protect them well, but encourage the communication and negotiation so that they do end up with a win-win.
Well, with what they actually want. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've seen that with your developments so far, and we appreciate that. We want to write the ordinance so that if we have a developer that's not as community minded, that they also participate.
So where I can see where I'm scared is we say that we're going to default to a payment. Who determines that payment?
Well, they have to, depending on each circumstance, how much screening would it require? And then they have to evaluate and show, I think reasonably, that this is what it would cost for us to do it, and this is what the payment would be, and maintain it, design it, maintain it, and rip it out. Here's the components, and it would have to be reasonable.
I agree, but I guess my fear is that if the developer comes in and you're the non-adjacent landowner who's not willing to negotiate or talk, and they're like, oh, here's your $1,000 check, who's going to police that? So that's the only concern that I see there, right?
Hey, Chris,
Yeah.
if I may. So in that instance, and this is just an idea that I'm throwing out. So say we have a landowner who's not communicating with us and we do the default. Should that be something that, at the time that we apply for a building permit, or, at some time frame, if we submit the estimate to the Lee County zoning administrator of what the estimated costs are, and when we write that check, to show that it wasn't just, hey, here's your $1,000.
Yes. I think that definitely goes, once again, working with good developers is going to be different than who might we work with in the future.
Sure.
You're more than willing to not have to maintain it and rip them out in 30 years, 30, 40, 50 years. The next person might just write $1,000 check and it's $1 a foot.
I think, for the non-participant, unless there's extenuating circumstances in terms of how close the house is to a property line, it makes sense to own those improvements. You have them, and they add value to the home. They provide screening. You own them then, and that does seem like a win-win. So I think and I don't know that we're going to do the mechanics here, but the idea would be to combine 1 and 4 as not really, it would be the default to say we're going to set them back 600 feet. And honestly, the way we described everything above, we've described an exclusion zone. This goes without saying. 1 could actually be done away with, I think, because it's already explained in the exclusion zone.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say, is we're just talking about the exclusion zone, so that's what I was gonna say. Is there a way that we can make that more
I
clear?
think I think we could do away with one.
Okay,
I had one quick question on the process of who negotiates the conversation between a non-participating landowner to actually get the ball rolling to say, what do you want? Screening? Do you want money? Whose responsibility is that? And how does that go about contacting the non-participating landowner?
That's a good question, Jamie. The next section kind of goes into that.
All right.
And it is really put on the developer's responsibility to do that. Now, the non-participant has the responsibility to negotiate in good faith, and if they choose not to, then it becomes more difficult. But it behooves the non-participant to be engaged in the process.
Thank you.
Yep.
I did remember, Mr. Bowers, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Adam.
I had one more thought that I forgot previously and I remembered now. So in this negotiation that would happen seemingly between the participant and the company, if there were to be an agreement, right, to one of these, it seems as though there is maybe a contract in place. And what I would feel boldly about would be that there is absolutely nothing else added in the contract that the homeowner has to commit to in conjunction with this. So an example might be a homeowner giving up any rights to speak up about the project in the future or solar in the future, or a landowner giving up some sort of right to have action somehow or another in the future if need be. I guess I'm just laying it out there that I don't want to see this to be something of a disadvantage to the homeowner, seemingly, that when they start to talk to the company about agreeing to things like this, it should be just that. It's an agreement to just declare how we're to interact with the project, and there should be nothing else of a position that the non-participant is put in to have to commit to and be sacrificing legal, status or something with this whole project, if that makes sense. I may not have articulated that quite right, but if you understand where I'm going with that.
If I could speak to that point real quick, Adam, I think I get what you're saying. So if the non-participating landowner follows the ordinance as to these specific portions, that's just triggered as a matter of right under the ordinance. What I will say is, if there's an agreement for other items, you can't necessarily restrict the landowner's right to enter into a contract. So I agree in part that if they're triggering their right to receive the buffer or the one-time payment, I don't think there's going to be any agreement entered into for that. It's just triggered under the ordinance. But I can't see the county restricting a landowner's right, or non-participating landowner to enter into a contract with the developer.
And I agree kind of with that message, Courtney, with where you were going with that. And that's kind of what I wanted to, certainly if there's more engagement and there's more specifics, I understand the need, of what you just outlined, but I just have, caution when they're just doing the straight negotiation. So I think you recognize as well, where I was coming from with that. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Could these contracts be brought in at the time of the petition?
I would disagree with that, or I wouldn't want to see that, because then you're getting into privacy issues. I mean, we don't require that the contract where, like a participating landowner, we don't require proof of that because it's a private transaction between the developer and the landowner.
I believe that it could be shared as record with any proprietary information blocked out. And I also think the contract, that Courtney referenced, for the participating landowner, I think it actually is wise of the county to actually have that be part of record with proprietary information.
Exactly. How would we know if it's not on record 20 years from now? Someone comes back and says.
Yep. I mean, if there's proprietary information, it can be blocked out, but I think that it needs to be both. Actually, it could be in the conversation to be transparent.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay, this is Amber. I just want to say also, as far as putting it with the petition, if there are people that don't want to negotiate, that would prohibit us from being able to put in a petition. So if you have people who don't want to negotiate, they will purposely, and they will purposely not negotiate to prohibit us from putting in a petition. And that would be problematic. So that's why I don't think it should be part of the petition. I think I certainly have no issues with it being, removing some of the information and including it as part of a building permit application. But including it as part of the petition, I think is problematic.
The payment that they would receive, forgive me if I'm reading this wrong, but it's an either or deal. There should be like line items if there's going to be X amount of trees that they're going to agree to or disagree to. I mean, it should be a generic contract that they're signing based on these ordinance where it's either this or that. And if they choose this, it's this dollar amount. If they choose this, it's this dollar amount. I don't feel that maybe they should be, you're not really going into a negotiation. It's either this or that. And the price of this is this, and the price of this, just like when you're bidding a project. If you want the trees, this is what we pay you. So I don't know why it would be an issue. Going back to what Adam said, it's not a privacy thing or a secret. These guys are, it's part of the ordinance, and it shouldn't be a secret or a confidentiality agreement based on this ordinance.
The problem.
Go ahead. Maybe I misunderstood that, but I agree with, I think that was Mr. Lawson who spoke, that if a landowner elects, option 2 or 3, I think that should be, made part of the record during the ZBA hearing to show, because ultimately, if you enter it during the ZBA hearing, you're agreeing to be bound by it, from the developer standpoint. What I may have misunderstood is I don't think, let's say that the developer strikes an agreement with a non-participating landowner on another issue. I don't think that should be made part of the record.
Correct. And Jamie, the problem with having like an actual dollar figure in here that says if it's on one side of your property, it's $20,000, just throwing it out there. But 3 sides is 60. 5 years from now, we have to go back and revisit this. This is on the developers to work with the non-participating on what the actual cost is.
Yeah, I think the cost of putting in a visual screen, and there can be different types of screen. We're talking about, generally, we assume vegetative screen. There can be earth berms, there can be fencing. I think the evergreen screen is probably going to be the most common, but the cost of putting that in on different types of ground, different topography are going to be different. And it's to the homeowners or to the non-participants' advantage to be the actual cost. And by putting in, they have to describe what the actual cost is to the non-participant and agree upon it. And having, I think Courtney's suggestion of having zoning look at that and make sure it seems reasonable compared to other situations we've had.
I would agree with that to some point, but you're talking, I'm just going to use the one that's near and dear to my heart. You're talking almost 4,000 acres. They're not bidding, when they bid that project, it's a line item of how much the tree costs to plant and how much the tree costs to remove it. They're not basing it on the ground. The labor is going to be the same. Your machine's going to be the same. The tree is going to have the same price. So there should be set dollar values. And I agree with Chris. But this project, okay, when we build this project, these are the line items as of the time it's built. Now, 20 years from now, those prices are going to go up. But again, there'll be a line item, because when you bid a job, you're not bidding it. Well, this has got sandy soil, this has got dirt, this has got rock. They're bidding this whole project at a line item to put the trees in, or a fence, or whatever may be the cost. So that should be a simple. I mean, nothing's simple in this process, but it should be fairly. And because who would dictate the cost then, like what you're saying, if not saying that Courtney would, but they go and negotiate and say, oh, this is going to be really hard to plant or really easy to plant trees in. So we're only going to give you $1,000. If you lived over there, we'd probably give you 5,000 because the ground's harder.
But each property is different too, based on the linear foot they're gonna have to screen.
Exactly. It might have a long, narrow lot or it's just, you
Yeah,
gotta have it
that's
per
gonna-
foot or per
You can't
tree or whatever it
assign one
is.
cost here.
I-
'Cause each one is gonna be a little different.
I guess I would caution us not to get overly prescriptive in the ordinance. I think it works to the disadvantage of both parties.
No, I understand that, but it just, you have to be, there has to be a fair process though, because
Sure.
like Chris says, Geronimo's working good with us, but the next guy, they might have a,
Well-
they're gonna have a lot different value of that agreement than what Courtney would have.
When you're gonna have a different attitude between landowners and companies and so on.
Yeah.
So.
If-
Go ahead.
If I could enter an idea too, real quick, if at the time of the developer files the petition, it might be easy enough for the developer to submit an affidavit, outlining which landowners took, the option, which landowners didn't, and which ones are going to be defaulted. So maybe that's a requirement at the time of filing the petition that the developer include an affidavit citing all of those, including all of the non-participating adjacent landowners and what action the developer intends to take.
And it has to include the payout of what it is, so that way we can keep the developers in check, so that way they're not beating up on my grandma, only paying her $1,000, but Adam's smart enough where he's getting $10,000.
Sure.
You don't want either party taking advantage of the other party. That'll be it.
Let's, if I may suggest, let's go down to, Charlie had a concern with how the mechanics of it, I guess. Let me summarize, I guess, our discussion above. I think are we in agreement? One is really not needed because it's addressed above. Does that make sense?
I got no problem keeping it in there. I like repetition, but
Okay.
because
so-
it just,
But then it gets confusing to say, select one of these options and it's not one. It gets confusing. I think what I would suggest then is we can keep it. I think we put it at the end as the default, like you were suggesting. And then I would say the option is number 2 becomes number 1. Number 3 becomes number 2. And that verbiage isn't an option. It just comes at the bottom without any number. And it would just describe the default position would be the 600 or the 1,200 feet square and a cash payment. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we want to fix that here, but yep, I think we got it. Okay, the screening may not be required within the full 600 feet of an exclusion zone or dwelling property of platted subdivision, provided the applicant submits a landscape plan prepared by, this was in there before. Any comment on that? That's not anything that is changed, I don't believe. We caught Chris's 8 feet and 4 years in there. Yep, I'm sorry. Yep. And then up just a little bit. This is where, so the Board of Appeals, the buffer notice shall include the following information. Oh, I'm sorry. In addition to providing notice consistent with the section 10(2)(b)(2)(d), the applicant shall give notice by regular and certified mail at least 15 days prior. So essentially it puts on the applicant the requirement to give the non-participating land or non-participating adjacent landowner those 2 options that we just described.
is 15 days enough or? Oh, okay. So it is 15 days. Why didn't?
And then, so it is certified. Can we specify it?
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
That's my point. Can we make it instead of 15 days, 30 days? So that way.
One thing I want to finish with quick idea about that. There's competing bids that make a lot of
I'm kind of hoping that Chris will read it. Okay, all right.
I got you. I got what you're saying. Okay.
The parts that are in state statute, we can't change, I guess, and those that are not, we can.
Yep.
Okay, so Charlie, does this address your question earlier about how this happens? I mean, there's more to it as we scroll down.
Okay, and maybe that'll address it more, but it doesn't seem to address when there needs to be an assertion of what the participating landowner or not. Okay.
Let's go down just a little bit. So the buffer notice shall include the following information. As you can see. So let's back up just a little bit.
I think what Charlie was saying, I don't want to speak for you, Charlie, but I think, you know, when is the deadline? If we're supposed to send out this notice at least 15 days prior to the hearing, and we're working with landowners, when we need to reach an agreement, my guess would be by the conclusion of the ZBA hearing so that we could enter that into evidence. So we would at least either have to, let's use that affidavit example where the developer has to file an affidavit during the ZBA hearing. At the close of presenting evidence at that hearing, we as a developer would have to outline what non-participating landowners took the option, and if we can't reach an agreement, we would have to propose, you know, the default for the rest of the landowners. Does that make sense?
That's correct. So what I was worried about is that you're going to get through this whole hearing and you won't have all of those agreements in place. Can a landowner 60, 90, 2 years from now come to the company and say, well, this is the one I want to do now? And they've already started building.
It's not uncommon. I mean, and I get what the response is going to be. That I know with my experience with the two companies that I've brought through is even after we get through the ZBA hearing, if a landowner comes, we try to work with them. We're not required to, but we want to be a good neighbor, so we do. But I get that there's other companies that the county is concerned about, so maybe we should put a time limit on it. That way it's an absolute rule.
Yeah, I agree with what Charlie's saying is you want to eliminate as much gray area as possible because somebody's going to take advantage of it. Maybe not this one, but the next one and so on and so forth. I think it's in the county, everybody's best interest to be specific as to the time frame.
I agree with the time frame. The only issue I would have is, I'm just going to use my personal example. What if the adjacent landowner wasn't notified of the property or notified of the project, which I know several on this, on the one that's going to be in my neighborhood weren't notified. What do they do then? If there's, when does that time limit start? From the time of notification or when they first become have knowledge of the project?
I mean, it's
Because I'm just going to use my example and the one that we're dealing with for my area. I personally wasn't notified of the project, and I'm an adjacent landowner, and I know my neighbor who's going to be surrounded on 3 sides wasn't notified of it by certified or anything. So what time does that time frame start? If you don't know about it, how can you negotiate?
Yeah, you got a good point. That's something that should not happen.
I think it just needs to be at the completion of the ZBA hearing because you want all that affidavit and all that information in the ZBA hearing so we can go back and hear it if we ever have a discrepancy.
Those hearings take some time, so it does
Right.
seem like that would be reasonable.
And I think to speak to Jamie's concern, I think his concern is you go through that hearing and then that affidavit submitted saying this is the default option that this landowner chose because they didn't engage with us. What if they didn't know about it? That's why they didn't engage.
I mean, I'm on everybody's side, but I understand exactly what you're saying.
If I may, real quick too, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk
No,
over
go ahead.
anyone.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So this paragraph in its entirety requires us to provide proof that we've sent the letter to the non-adjacent homeowner, right? So it would be flushed out during that hearing that the landowner didn't receive the notice, or that it wasn't sent. So at that point, we have not complied with the ordinance. And if we don't comply with the ordinance, then we're in trouble from the developer. The petition may not go through.
Well, I in a perfect world, I would agree, Courtney, but sometimes it's not a perfect world. And just because comments are made that certified mail, each applicant or each adjacent landowner was notified by certified mail, didn't happen. So in a perfect world, that's correct, but everybody knows we don't live in a perfect world.
Right, but we would have to submit, I mean, like when I bring a petition, I have to submit proof of those certified mailings. So I will either take a copy of all the green cards that I've received back and submit that into evidence during the hearing. So wouldn't that be the same requirement for this? I would bring that same proof and enter it into evidence during the ZBA hearing?
Yeah, I guess it would be. I guess my problem would be, okay, so you've got 30 landowners that you contacted. You didn't contact 2. It's getting to that person who cares. Because trust me, I've seen in this process, there's not a lot of people that care. It's
Jamie, to their point, is if that comes up, then that's evidence brought in front of the ZBA.
It's not though, Chris, because the time frame was already passed to provide evidence, just like bad credit, everything that comes up after the very minimal time that we have to, okay, you got a big project coming, I didn't know about it. The hearing's already, the time has passed for you to provide evidence. The Lee County Board can't read evidence, can't see any evidence because it's like a court case and everybody's in deliberation now. So that's my problem. And that's what I've been dealing with in this project is, unfortunately, they could be it's just once the time's passed, and nobody seems to care because we follow the rules that we set and you were forgotten about or were missed. It's not a big deal because 30 people were notified. Trust me, I'm dealing with that right now. So it's not a fictitious or a fantasy that I'm presenting to you.
I mean, it sounds like it was an error for sure, if that happened, and I'm sure it did.
But it wasn't an error that the Lee County Board mentioned that it was sent certified mail, because they were not. The ZBA, I'm sorry, yes.
If I may interject, it is an improvement to make sure that it is specifically stated that it's by certified mail, and to Courtney's point, that the evidence shall be provided and that the ZBA shall do their due diligence to physically look at that, presentation of evidence and make sure that a fact is truly a fact. I mean, it takes everyone, including the county, doing their due diligence. If the wording is there and as such that they check all the proper boxes, that it's done properly. And, I think that the wording needs to be there. I mean, again, the certified mail being specific, the ZBA just has to make sure that they're doing their job. But I wanted to pivot to something as well with the monetary default, right? You have a non-participant that doesn't engage and they defaulted to the monetary. And then you go through the ZBA hearings. Let's say that is the time that is declared what choice each person made, but we know there's 2 or 3 years before the project actually comes to completion, right? So there's a long period of time there for indecision possibly, or buyer's remorse, so to speak, of, well, I made this choice, but maybe now I'm thinking more clearly and maybe I want to alter that. At what point do you declare that the payment be made to the non-participant as well, right? Like when is that payment actually due to the non-participant? And I again come back to properties change hands, an agreement that's made with the previous property owner and then sells and the payment wasn't made yet. Again, I just have caution with it being the default that it is the monetary payment, with just different dynamics that happen right over the course of time. So I guess specifically, when would that payment also be made? If that was the default, what is the time of it? Because it has to be made out to the correct person or there's going to be a dispute.
Well, I don't think I think Adam brings up a good point, is it should be defined when that payment is made.
Landowners public.
Would it make sense to make to require the payment made, either, at the completion of construction or at the time of the building permit, when the building permit is granted?
Well, landowners public record, how can it be a mistake?
Well, he's saying if I
it
sold the property in
changes.
2 years, I believe that at the time of the permit, that way it's started before the project. I think that's realistic.
And then it would logically flow then to Adam's point, if the landowner changes their mind or wishes to change tact, maybe make that the cutoff as well.
I would not. I think I don't want to put something like that in the ordinance. I think that needs to be handled once you've made your decision.
Sure.
Be negotiated between the non-participating landowner and the company. I don't think.
Okay.
Then you open up another door, right?
Yeah, right.
Oh, now it's 2 years. I want to do something different.
Sure.
I think that's the responsibility of the county. We just write
I
the
want more
ordinance.
money, or I want.
I think the agreement should be, once it's decided, it needs to be binding on both parties. Unless they decide to do something different. Let's scroll down here. I'm sorry. We scroll down. Yes. I think that's really okay in the fencing.
Yep, so you're giving them the option of 8-foot woven wire fence.
Correct. And are there any other changes in the rest?
You added the portion. Yep.
Oh, that's not in this version. We looked at that last time and I don't know that it got included here, but we'll make sure it does.
I also wanted to add something, I haven't been reading about tree removal.
Do you want to describe what the issue is?
Grab a mic real quick to do it.
I just wrote it in here.
Oh, okay.
Structures compromising the solar farm shall be constructed and located in a manner so as to minimize the necessity to remove existing trees upon the parcel. And in no event shall wooded acreage compromising more than 2% of the deeded acreage of the parcel or portion of the parcel devoted to the solar farm use be removed without demonstrating that such removal is necessary for the reasonable construction and efficient performance of the use. So right now I'm seeing in a solar farm that's being developed that the farmers are right now tearing down tree lines. And is that necessary? Is the company telling them to? And I would like to preserve as many trees as possible without interfering with the project, of course, but unnecessary tree removal is evil in my mind. I don't know. Evil. I thought.
Courtney, do you or any of your group have any concerns regarding tree removal?
Sure. The only concern that I would have is if the landowner has agreed to it, if the participating landowner has agreed to it, I mean, it's their choice to have it ripped out. If I understand correctly, it'd be their choice to have it removed.
But how do we know that landowner doesn't realize that they have that option, that the company's just gonna come in and destroy the trees and they think the landowner thinks it's okay and they don't have a voice in it?
It's not that cheap to remove trees. So they're going to remove necessary trees, but it is not easy to remove.
Solar projects don't like birds. They
Well,
don't like,
That's probably true.
But that landowner or the landowner would have granted lease rights to the developer and they would have entered into it. Generally, what happens when a landowner enters into this lease agreement with the developer, they bring an attorney and it's a negotiated process. But I mean, that's part of the leasehold rights that the developer would obtain. And so that would be on the landowner to negotiate that. We're going to be restricting a landowner's right to do whatever he or she wants to do with this property.
Can I
Go ahead.
interject a question on some of this that we're discussing right now? I understand that it is the property's owner's right to do what they want to do, but are there any governmental regulations according to AMA or any of the other groups that are out there that could affect any difference of opinions on that because of the laws as they're stated? And I'm just asking that. Yes, it's my property. If I want to cut that tree down, I'm going to cut that tree down, or I'm going to change that ditch bank or do something. What we're sitting here giving them carte blanche because it's quote unquote their property. Yet there's other elements of all this stuff that's going on that can be contrary to that also. And I'm just asking, where are we at with the property owner saying, well, it's my property, I'll do whatever I want to do with it? Where's the legality in that? Is there any obligation for them to prove that there's no problem in doing so according to any farming regulations, government regulations, or anything else?
I guess what I would say is I don't know of anything that would prevent a farmer from maintaining their trees as they desire. And if there is, then they're bound by those. It seems an overreach, in my opinion, for us to get into that biz bag.
Well, I don't see anything wrong then with leaving it the way it is, because I agree with Dee 100% on that. Whether some of them like it or not, the language is there. If it's not necessary to go into that depth, I say leave the language there as it's stated already.
The language is not in the current ordinance on tree removal, correct? That was just a proposed addition. It seems to me as overreach.
Well, I don't know how it's overreach, Dave. Dee just read it.
Well, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to criticize you or anything. I don't understand that.
and I just found it in another ordinance and I'm just proposing it, Mike.
All right. Sorry, Dave, I withdraw that.
No, not at all. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I'm good. I'll pass.
I just know in terms of trees, I think it is reasonable to allow that to be left up to the actual landowner. He has that right now, and I don't know that because we're using it for solar that should change. That would meet my suggestion for now, at least. I mean, what we're doing here, we do want to put this in place, but it's not like it's this ordinance may be improved upon at a later date. I don't think we have to address absolutely every area. We certainly want to address the ones of concern.
Do you want to take a vote on that?
On the
trees?
Sure, we can.
It makes everybody happy. At least we can, it's a talking point that we all We
Okay.
decide whether or not we want to put it on or not.
So are you making that a motion?
Sure, I'll take
What
the,
is your motion?
I don't want to make the motion, but I think
Well,
Mike
somebody
should.
needs to make the motion. It has to be somebody of the committee.
If you're doing it for my benefit, it's not broken, leave it alone.
That's your motion, Mike?
Dave,
I abstain.
I would agree with Mike and Dee, and obviously I love trees, but I don't think it's cost effective for a solar farm to tear out a forest. So if we're talking about some trees on a fence row, some trees around a building, most of those are gonna be some kind of garbage tree anyway. You know, so I don't see a point in us going further with it, and I'm in total agreement on trees.
Yeah, I also like to see trees myself, but I also,
May I offer a little bit of conversation on this topic, kind of with,
sure.
so, you know, we are generally just kind of a flat black dirt kind of a area, right? We actually have a limited amount of timber in our county, but I will let you all know the SESs are in a dramatic way going on timber land. When you get into southern parts of the country, they're absolutely removing a complete forest to then try to set solar on it. I mean, this is real. So even egregious as it sounds, it is. It's crazy. So I applaud Dee for looking into this. It has a little bit less impact, or you understand less the gravity, because you generally just see, well, where our trees are at would be scrub trees on a fence line or something, and well, who cares? But quite frankly, there are some strategic waterways that drain our land as well, and that are also important to draining the size of what an SES would be. And on these waterways, there could be well-established tree lines that are actually helping to hold the bank in, or prevent massive erosion or damage or things like that. And that's what has been established, you know, for hundreds of years along that waterway, let's say. And what we're seeing is the potential that they could just, the company, not the landowner, the company completely tearing out all of that structure and dramatically changing then what the cause and effect might be on that land. So it is important. Now the AMA, this is being done possibly when the AMA isn't even a signed agreement and active. But I mean, there's thought to what Dee did, and I need to like look at the wording that she brought up to like understand it a little better, because I wouldn't scoff this off at all. This is something that I would say is important. Now, to everyone's point, I mean, there's a contract that the landowner gives up complete rights. They on paper own the land, but they have no right to potentially step foot on that land or to decide whether that tree gets cut down or not. So the landowner may be looking ominously at these beautiful trees that they do like, that they were not aware that they gave their right up to the company to go ahead and decide whether they should stand or be cut down or what should happen to them. And again, that's because of this private contract that no one is allowed to see. And that also should come to an end. We should know then, we should make that contract that these people are in transparent with proprietary information blocked out, so that we know that the landowner didn't have right, and when was it executed. So is it the company or the landowner that is still responsible for these decisions being made? That'd be important. Now the other thing would be the FSA office, or the Soil and Water Conservation, I would think, would have some involvement when stuff like this is being done. It seems like they typically do have some sort of involvement. I don't know, but that should be checked into. So I don't know. This wording was presented. We can't really see it on Zoom. It's in very small screen, or I've not seen the wording, but to just move to a vote to say that we shouldn't be thinking about this, I think this is a valid time for us to be looking into this. So take the time and spend the due process on the topic, because this is a new one, and we'll go from there. So that's all I had.
Thank you.
How closely does the USDA monitor stuff like that when it comes in regards to erosion or wetlands or whatever? And people can't just go out. I mean, I'm sure landowners can't go in and just, in some cases, tear out trees, carte blanche, because it upsets wetlands, or it might propose an erosion situation. nobody foresees, but you get somebody who's brighter and farther up the food chain to determine that. I mean,
And something I'll kind of piggyback off of what you just said, John, there's a variety of studies that the developer has to do, especially for the instance of like erosion and water runoff and all that. That's governed by the AMA. We do drainage studies, hydrology reports, and all of that. So, I mean, if there was an instance where there were trees that were helping prevent it, that would be included in that report, and we would have to follow what those recommendations would be.
I guess that's what I was getting at, Courtney. I mean, there's people far smarter than I who determine that kind of thing.
And if I could, we also are required to delineate all the wetlands. We send that delineation to the Army Corps of Engineers, which has jurisdiction over the regulated wetlands in the state of Illinois. So any wetlands that are what they consider what's called a navigable waterway, meaning if there is a stream or creek in there, they have jurisdiction over those. Anything that is wooded wetlands, which anything that has trees, they would consider wooded wetlands with a stream. So those are considered what we call avoidance areas. We do not typically build in those because those are the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers. And there are a number of hoops, as you can imagine, that have to be gone through in order to build in any kind of wooded wetland specifically, as opposed to just a regular wetland. So there are a number of hoops that have to be jumped through in order to do any kind of development. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we have to consult U.S. Fish and Wildlife on the project. So there are a number of hoops that have to be gone through in order to do any kind of development of this scale, regardless of what the county's ordinance says.
Dee, I just want to kind of touch on your situation or your comment earlier, though. Here we are again, kind of to reiterate my deal or frustration. We sat in the process, the zoning board did, for the South Dixon Solar, and they specifically said they weren't going to remove any trees. And then this excavator popped up and they started pulling trees out of the creek line along the fence lines. And I think Adam actually brought that up, and the developer claimed they had no say in that process, or they weren't doing that.
I know that farm specifically, and that was
Just a bad timing.
It was just bad timing. There was actually beaver dams in it that needed to come out. It was bad timing. It had nothing to do with the developer. That's been on planned by the farmer for the last 2 years. So
because I know just east of that creek line that they tore trees out of, they cleaned that whole fence line out that's not even on it.
That was all just bad timing.
Okay, perfect.
That's all that ended up
just
being.
ironic. Okay.
So yes.
Thank you.
But language would prevent bad timing too.
Yeah, I think, and I want to be respectful of Dee's intent here. I think, and as Adam kind of brought up, and I really didn't think about, Lee County Board, I could not imagine us approving a project that we were going to tear down 20 acres of timber to put on solar panels. We're just not going to approve that. And there's checks and balances. I don't think ZBA would suggest that we tear down acreages of hardwood forest to put up solar panels. That's just not going to fly.
Well, what might be common to you might not for the next guy too, that's in here, because, personally, I can't fathom taking 4,000 acres of prime farm ground and putting it in solar either, but that's my opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion. So just because it's common sense to you might not be for the next guy.
If I may interject here too, that may certainly be a question, keep in mind through this ZBA process, one of the affirmations that the developer says on their record is that they agree to be bound by all representations and modifications that they testify to during the hearing. So I think that issue could be easily flushed out by an interested party, they show up to the hearing and say, what's your plan for ripping out trees? And if the company says, you know, we're not taking out anything more than what's necessary, there's your answer. And the company agrees to be bound by that. So to me, it's easy to flush that out and easy to get an answer.
Courtney, it's not easy though, because I have one of a witnesses that's perjured himself, and it's not easy to flush out. I'm in the process of doing that right now during the last zoning board. Well, he was under oath, he perjured himself, and it's not that easy. Trust me, I'm going through it. So it would be the same thing as what you're saying. If they're under oath saying they'll do something and they don't, you got to get to someone that cares or jump through the hoops. And then they have to make that decision whether it was, I guess, intent. I mean, there's processes for it, and it's not that easy. I'm going through it. Thank you.
Okay. So, are there any other changes in the rest of the document? Oh, sure. Do you have that wording handy? Yeah, I think we did review that, and I don't think there were any changes suggested. If everybody concurs, we can just make sure that gets in the final draft here.
Couldn't hear what was said there. I'm sorry.
We're looking at the community meeting portion that Dee had written up to allow more conversation at a local level.
And it was agreed that that should be inserted then, Mr. Nordberg? Is that what you're referencing?
Yes, I think everybody on this believes it should be there. I think the developers believe it should be there. It's just more transparency at a local level.
And it encourages communication.
And it encourages communication,
Yeah.
absolutely, because all this is going to be done at, it looks like township buildings and places like that. So even where you've got the non-participating landowner who doesn't want to work with the developers, they should hopefully at least respect the township supervisor and the process there, and they can go have it heard there rather than in front of the ZBA. Correct, Dee? Is that for the intent of this portion?
And from a developer standpoint, we agree with this.
Yeah, I recall that both parties were thinking this was a good idea, and we certainly want to.
The only thing that I can see as a change or the notification directly to property owners within 1,000 feet. Is there any way of including, also has to be much like an annual meeting for a township, that you have to post it at 1 or 2 or 3 spots, so that way it includes, there you go, that it needs to be included in the newspaper, just to get everybody, not just, it affects the whole township, we know that.
And could I make a comment, Mr. Bowers, in this section?
Yes, please do.
Is this the section, and I'm asking everyone as a whole, that we make sure that language is there as well to notify everyone by certified mail? I believe this is important not just for the SES, but for any other special use permit, perhaps it be wind or what have you. I mean, I've seen other counties specifically request this notice so that we know as a county and as non-participants that they were served notice that didn't go in the junk mail pile and not get opened. It was, you signed for it, you received it, confirmation. So that, is this where that would be added, or what is everyone's position?
I don't think for a community meeting I certainly want to do that for the actual official notice, but the community meeting, I don't know that we would require a certified notification of that. We certainly want it known, and we can put it out in multiple fashions, but.
Once again, I believe like when this gets notified, like even as a township supervisor, I would hope that Dee's going to be reaching out to the township supervisor and be like, hey, we want to use your building. Also, here's a document that you can post in the post office or the local grain elevator that would already be made up to just be able to get the word out
certified letter or not, there's a lot of people don't pick them up.
Yes.
It's better to do it with public means.
We can take advantage of our website and potentially social media.
This is
as
just
well.
trying to be another opportunity for additional conversation in a non-county way.
One point that I would just throw in there, if I may, is since we're required to notify all property owners within a minimum of that 1,000 feet, which is kind of large in the grand scheme of things, I would ask that it be by regular mail then. If we're doing a minimum of 1,000 feet, I would ask that it just be by regular mail.
Could that be combined with the actual notification? No, okay.
I'm not comfortable with that, Dave. How are you gonna prove that they even received it? Because when I checked on the requirements of certified mail and signing and everything, or whoever delivers it, the verification that they delivered it says delivered at or in the mailbox at the residence. Where do you define the term at? It could be at the front porch, it could be at the machine shed, it could be any place. They're saying at or in the mailbox or something to that. That's not a verbatim as I read it, but that's basically what it said. We left it at that location, we put it in the mailbox. Or they use the address. I don't really, without fingering through all my paperwork, I can't give it to you verbatim as they put it there. Just for somebody to come up and say, well, we delivered it. Yeah, well, the check's in the mail too.
I don't think we can solve that here. US Post Office has their requirements of where they can and can't deliver it, certified mail requirements.
I'm not trying to solve it at our level, Dave. I'm just saying that there needs to be, as far as I'm concerned, how do you know where it was delivered?
I think we need to define certified mail here, though. I think we can do that here. So we're all in agreement, because I don't believe what Mike's talking about is certified mail. Certified mail requires a signature from someone to receive it. If it's in or at a mailbox, that's not certified mail. Certified mail, by definition, the US Post Office requires a signature. And I don't believe what South Dixon Solar was certified mail, because nobody signed for anything. It was put in or at their mailbox, which is not certified mail. So we should probably define, Courtney, is that correct? I mentioned, I heard you say earlier that you collected all the green cards, which would show that people signed for what you delivered. Is that correct?
Yeah, it real quick, just forgive me because I've never sent out a piece of certified mail until I was at the law office. But the way that it happened for me was you fill it out, you attach it to the envelope, and then once landowners sign for it, the green card gets returned back to my office. And that's what I make a copy of. And there's some instances where the landowner does not pick it up. And in which case that whole envelope is returned back to me and I make a copy of that and make it part of the record.
Thank you.
Under COVID restrictions, though, I believe that the US Post Office has changed how they handle certified mail. And after so many delivery attempts, because they are trying to restrict contact with personnel, that they can leave it now. I just want to point that out. So I just want to say that they may not have contact with people to get a signature because of COVID.
And that's a post office policy. That's not anything at the developer's direction.
Right. No. That's a post office policy, but I believe that because I had gotten something certified that was left inside my door that I did not sign for.
But we can't try to dictate.
But there would also be a paper trail. I know for us as a business, we send certified mail all the time. And there's actually that card that's filled out by the person sending the mail. That is basically a paper trail with the tracking number and all that, but it actually would be filled out as certified mail, and that it is to require a signature. Now, whether the post office decides to shove them all in or at the mailbox is their discretion, but there would be a paper trail showing that certified mail was indeed signed up for and was the intent to be delivered.
Correct.
Just back to the community meeting, my intent was just to inform the citizens prior to the 15-day notice. I don't know when the community meeting, I hadn't really thought about a community meeting like a month prior to the hearing. I don't know, I guess maybe that should be put in there. But this was just an informative meeting, letting them know it's coming, the hearing.
30 days prior, 30 days prior to the 15 days. That's when,
Count 30.
So if I may make a comment then on if we're specifically in this section, if we're specifically talking about how do we notify residents of a community meeting specifically, I agree with Dee that I appreciate this writing and it needed to be, like Dee's saying, like a month before the ZBA hearings or something of a larger notice than just the 15 days that state statute requires. That's the direction of this. And so I guess I understand to some extent when Courtney Kennedy said, I'd rather just send this by regular mail. That would be meaning the notice of this town hall can be sent by normal mail versus it being sent by certified mail. So I understand if that's what the topic is, I understand the debate, and I understand by the request maybe to just send this notice by regular mail. Now, separate from that, I just want to be clear, separate from that, the notice of the ZBA hearings, the required notice that's to be sent to the non-participating landowners, I feel strongly that it needs to be worded in our ordinance that it's required to be sent by certified mail.
and Adam, that's exactly what it is. So
Okay.
Yes.
that's a certified, and this is just to, and once again, you know as well as I do, when we start, because like you said, they're gonna have to reach out to township supervisors to set up time, date, locations. That word travels fast, especially if you give 30 days notice to have the meeting. You're going to be able to get everybody there that you want.
Could we do, and I agree with that, the state statute for the notice for the ZBA hearing, it has to be certified. So that would never change. But could we, for the timeline in which to hold the meeting, could we do like a minimum of 30 days? That way, I mean, if depending on when we can organize the meeting with the township and coordinate it, I would rather just have, a minimum set. That way we're not worrying about, hitting it exactly on 30 days or whatever,
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good discussion.
David, just to add, I appreciate what Dee's done on this because the Aldina Solar Farm, that was the biggest complaint I heard in phone calls was we didn't know about it until 15 days. We didn't have a chance to do anything. It was the same issue on a different subject, but with the wedding venue we had on St. Hollow Road was the same thing. We weren't notified. We didn't know about it till the last minute. I think this is a great opportunity for this to improve us.
Yep, absolutely. I think it speaks to this process. You know what? I've only been involved with the county government for a little over 4 years now. And I would tell you, Jamie, people do care. We don't do this because of the money.
No, I realize that, but trust me.
So I take a little bit of bristle at that. I guess.
I understand. I would from your point of view too.
Yeah. So, and I.
You have to realize my frustration as well.
Walked in your shoes, but people do care, and we are trying to, I'd say, provide a good quality of life for our residents. And I appreciate everybody's passion here. We do at times need to agree to disagree, but I do appreciate the how I say, the way we've been able to hold these meetings and talk back and forth. This is ideal in my way of thinking. So I think we've accomplished what we've set out to do. Dee, is there anything beyond this? I think we caught this one.
Dave, can I ask one question just for clarification?
Sure.
I'm going to direct one question to Courtney, and I'm not trying to be critical. I just want to understand some more stuff. Being an old man that I am, sometimes it takes a little longer. But Courtney, on the negotiation between a participant, non-participant, and I would lean, I guess, back toward the non-participant if they didn't want to participate, as we talked previously, and they decided to negotiate something separate. When does the negotiation turn from an alleged public knowledge information and a private contract?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Could you just repeat it one more time?
We were discussing earlier as far as a non-participant, just, kind of bowing out and going into the shadows and not participating. And then the company or the applicant decides that they would try to negotiate with them. When they negotiate something that's an additional, when does it become private? When does any other negotiations become a private contract? When they do enter in that conversation?
Yeah, I would say yes. In my experience, what happens, so, if a non-participating landowner comes to me or goes to the company and we start trying to talk to them, at that point, it's private, and we may enter into an agreement with them that's private.
Okay, I guess continuing with another question then, I have experienced a situation not with solar, but with wind regarding a private contract. And I'm not trying to be a lawyer here or anything. I'm just trying to understand things. So all other negotiations, if it hasn't entered into a status of private, is then a public situation. Is that right? For information.
If they have not entered into a contract, you're saying?
Well, I'm understanding from your, from the communications earlier that if they have failed to respond or even agree to what's being done with everybody, and now there's a second attempt or third or whatever to negotiate something in addition to what everybody else is getting. I think it was related to when Adam had spoke about it, that it's a private contract. And that information isn't privy to the Freedom of Information Act.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to look at this at a standpoint of view that if a company comes in and says, we're going to give you this, 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 and this, and they don't comply with that, where is any enforcement available for that if it's a private contract and you can't get the information? That's where I'm trying to go with it.
Sure. And my answer to that, I think, is kind of twofold. I think if it's a private contract and the company didn't do what the company said it was going to do, the private landowner can enforce that through a breach of contract action. When it becomes public is when, let's say you're in the ZBA hearing and the company says on the record, we're going to do this, this, and this. Then I think that the county has some authority to enforce it, but I would defer to whatever your state's attorney says on that. But if they say it on the record during the hearing, then that's a public commitment. They're going to be bound by that.
Okay, Mr. Boonstra, can I direct maybe a reply from you or ask for a reply from you on that? Are we going to end up in a situation like we have previously? Not being able to enforce any of the conditions of agreements or whatever?
I think there's a lot to unpack with what you're saying. What you were talking about before with FOIA, it wouldn't be subject to FOIA because it's private agreements between two private parties. When you're talking about any type of violation that may occur by any of the conditions that the company is agreeing to be bound by, there are options available to the county if there's something like we talked about with the tree removal. If there's trees being removed, even though it was not a part of that hearing and it impacts any type of land impact studies that were presented, then the county could certainly look at filing an injunction against the company from moving forward.
Okay, all right. Courtney, thank you. Mr. Bush,
Yeah, no problem.
appreciate it. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Mike. The only thing that I might suggest we take a look at is definitions, and there may be a few that we could add. I think that the conversation has I don't think there's anything that would be a surprise, but I think adding to that definition section would be a plus. And we can try to do that as part of this. I think that concludes, and I think we're generally in agreement with what we talked about here. I know there's differing opinions, but I'm a little, I don't know that we need, are we ready to take a vote at this point, or do we do this one more time? What is the committee's thought? I think we need a clean document.
I would like to see the baked document,
Yep.
I would too. Thank you.
but I also don't think the next meeting is going to last very long. We're going to look at a baked document and
Just gonna add.
Could I offer, I'm sorry on the flow, but could I offer just a couple more thoughts that I had as we near the end of this meeting and look to a baked document?
Yes,
Go ahead.
please. Go ahead, Adam.
So there was a couple of things I feel that have come up from the ZBA from time to time, and Dee, maybe you can speak to this, but there's like a request of indemnifying somehow the county through this process from, is that anything that touches an ordinance, Dee? Like at the end of the last ZBA, it was referenced that there was not an agreement from the company to somewhat indemnify the county. Would you be able to speak on that? The second topic that I had that has come up and been something of contention, I guess, would be the duration of a special use permit. With the extraordinary circumstances of what we're doing and it somewhat conflicting with the directive of the county, the language is there, and I feel like it was really well stated by the ZBA in the last hearing. At the conclusion, they were actually asking that they were communicating that this permit expire after 35 years and that it be decommissioned. Their stands was explained well. I don't want to paraphrase what they were saying. I think it should be reviewed, but is there anything of thought? Because now is the time to talk about that as well. And I don't know what Dee's thoughts are there or anyone's take is. And then the third point that I want to bring up specifically is it has been given a plain example that we have a board member that is under this private contract, and we don't know what the language of the contract is and whether it colludes the ability for one to govern in capacity or to have influence without being in breach of the private contract or in conflict of a private contract. We've also had a ZBA member that's in private contract as well. Now, from time to time recusing themselves, but really it's unclear as to what legal issues they may be in and be overreaching based on their contract that they might have with a solar developer. And that's why I advocate for transparency to this, that those contracts be public record, except for proprietary information be blacked out. I've seen this when I've studied other ordinances across the country, and I feel like what we've seen in our county is an example perhaps of why something like that is requested. Because it would bring transparency and understanding then if an individual was bound by a private contract, and that dictate, maybe what they're able to do or what not able to do. It just brings clarity to the situation and transparency. So those were the three topics I just wanted to bring up and allow you guys to go from there.
so as far as the board member comment, Adam, those are still private contracts. They're private individuals. If I want to enter into a contract with anybody, it's nobody's right to tell me what I need to disclose or not to disclose other than me and my wife with that said company. And as long as the ZBA members and county board members continue to abstain from votes, recluse themselves from the conversation, we all have conflicts, right? And that's why we have the ability to step away. So I understand the frustration where you're at with them having private contracts, but I don't think it's anywhere close to our authority to be able to allow these people to disclose that.
I might be able to answer his question about the special use part. I don't know that legally it can be set a timeline for that special use to cease, and I'll let Dee kind of answer this too. But once the special use, once you stop using that property as that special use, the property automatically resorts back to what it was originally. So for instance, for the solar farm, if it's decommissioned 35 years from now, automatically by operation of law, once that use ceases, the land will revert back to Ag 1 without that special use.
The other piece of that is obviously these things have a expected life. If they want to refresh the panels in any significant way, it requires another permit. And at that point, we can either allow or deny it based on how good a neighbor are they. We're not gonna, if we've had problems with a particular developer or project, we wouldn't be inclined to renew that building permit. And hence, at the end of the life of the panels, they would have no, they have no ability to refresh and
Repower.
Yep.
And where is that? That's a good topic. I mean, in the wind, there is clearly a repower because they would pull a turbine off the tower and repower it. We've seen examples of that. Where is that type of language in our ordinance?
It's not in the ordinance, but it's in our permit process.
Okay. It's in the wording is there as to what should happen upon a repower then?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
To be able to do that, they need to apply for a building permit. And that's a requirement of a repower.
To go back before the ZBA as well?
No. Is it? Yes? Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, that is correct. I'm sorry. I was just thinking of the permit part of it.
Can't hear you.
So, Adam, did you hear that? If they're replacing panels, they can replace panels. That just takes a permit. But to repower the whole project, to replace the panels on the whole project, and maybe we need to define that maybe it's anything greater than. But that's something we'll look at in the permit. That's not in the ordinance. Dave knows where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Okay. I just see it as being similar to wind and that repower. And I guess I not studied wind, but I feel it being a similar.
I think we want to be careful not to provide, a loophole where they could replace 10% every year and avoid the ZBA or permit process. So
right, we'll have to look into that.
Yep.
What about the timeline as to if they clear this through county board, is there a timeline to begin construction, or is that something that we can? Okay, so there is. But it's not 50 years, so that's all I cared about. Perfect.
Okay. I think my suggestion would be give Dee and Alice and I a chance to incorporate the final changes that we've talked about here today. I don't know if we're ready to schedule a meeting or if we want to just leave that. Obviously we'll schedule it at least for public notice.
Let's get through committee week and then actually if we can get through county board week, that'd be even better because I'm got other meetings that same week as well.
Yep. My suggestion is we kind of schedule that at the point that it's ready because there's a little bit of work yet here to get it in a final format. Yeah, and I know I have kind of monopolized Dee and Alice's time for part of a day, a good part of a day to get here, and I know we've got some more work to do. And there's obviously a lot of other moving parts going on as well. So we'll do our best to make it as quickly as we can, but I'll confer with the group of a time, and then we'll post it in the newspaper for all the interested parties. Anything else before we conclude? Otherwise, I could take a motion to adjourn. Or to recess, pardon me.
I'll make that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your participation.
I'll treat you.